The suggestion to focus on weekly rather than daily progress addresses a genuine problem with fitness tracking, but it also reveals some of the limitations of how consumer technology approaches health measurement. Daily fluctuations in activity, weight, heart rate, and other health metrics are normal and expected. Your body is not a machine that produces identical output every day. Sleep quality affects performance. Stress hormones impact heart rate. Hydration status changes weight. Soreness from previous workouts reduces today's capacity. Focusing on daily numbers can make these normal variations feel like failures or warning signs when they're actually just noise. The Apple Watch, like most fitness tracking devices, emphasizes daily goals and daily achievements. You close your rings each day. You get daily summaries of your activity. This design choice makes sense from a motivational standpoint because daily feedback provides more frequent reinforcement than weekly summaries. But it also creates the psychological trap of judging yourself based on each day's performance. Weekly tracking smooths out these variations and shows actual trends. If your average daily steps this week are higher than last week's average, you're making progress, even if you had 2 low-activity days this week. This longer view is more accurate and less emotionally volatile. You're less likely to feel discouraged by a single bad day when you're thinking in terms of weekly patterns. However, let's examine the limitations. Weekly tracking requires you to manually calculate averages or wait for weekly summaries, which reduces the immediacy of feedback. The Apple Watch does provide weekly summaries, but they're not as prominent as daily information. You have to seek them out, which many users don't do consistently. There's also a risk that focusing on weekly averages can allow you to rationalize inactivity. If you know you can compensate for 3 sedentary days with 4 active days and still hit your weekly average, you might let yourself be inactive more often, planning to make up for it later. This can work, but it can also become a pattern of procrastination that leaves you cramming activity into weekends and remaining sedentary during the work week. The sample chart comparing daily versus weekly progress would presumably show wild swings in the daily view and a smoother upward trend in the weekly view. This visualization is powerful for demonstrating why weekly tracking is psychologically easier. But we should acknowledge that some people are motivated by daily goals specifically because they create urgency and frequent opportunities for achievement. What's missing from this discussion is consideration of monthly or quarterly tracking, which shows even broader patterns. Your weekly activity might vary based on work schedules, weather, or social commitments, but over months, you can see whether you're generally becoming more active, maintaining consistent activity, or gradually declining. This long-term view is most meaningful for understanding whether your approach is sustainable. The fundamental issue is that any single metric tracked over any single time period gives you an incomplete picture. Daily step counts don't tell you about exercise intensity. Weekly averages don't reveal whether your activity is distributed throughout the week or crammed into 2 days. Monthly totals don't show whether you're improving cardiovascular fitness or just accumulating low-intensity movement. A more sophisticated approach uses multiple time frames depending on what you're trying to understand. Daily feedback is useful for maintaining consistency and catching yourself when you're becoming sedentary. Weekly averages are useful for tracking progress without getting caught up in daily fluctuations. Monthly and quarterly views are useful for understanding long-term sustainability and whether your approach is working. The Apple Watch gives you access to all this data, but most users don't have the health literacy or data analysis skills to interpret it effectively. The default daily emphasis is what most people rely on, even when weekly or monthly views would be more informative. This is a design choice by Apple that prioritizes engagement over analytical depth. If you're going to focus on weekly progress, you need to actively resist the daily feedback the watch provides. This requires discipline and a clear understanding of why you're doing it. It also requires accepting that some days will feel like failures even when you're making good weekly progress. This can be psychologically difficult, especially during the habit formation phase when daily reinforcement is particularly valuable. Perhaps the best approach is to use daily goals for behavior maintenance and weekly averages for progress assessment. Let your daily rings tell you whether you're staying consistent with your intentions. Let your weekly summaries tell you whether you're actually improving over time. This dual framework provides both short-term motivation and long-term perspective.